you want to win in the giveaway that I'm running at the moment, all you need to do is like, subscribe, and comment down below to tell me that you're subscribed, and you'll be entered into the giveaway pool. If you want to know what you're going to win, wait till the end of the video. And with that being said, guys, let's get on to this video about Palworld and Pokemon. This video is about how Palworld, a game developed by Pocket Pair, a small indie studio that had relatively little experience in the gaming industry, became the biggest game in the world and outdid Pokemon, a series made by Game Freak under Nintendo, based on the world's most profitable IP. We've got one company that developed their game with a total budget of $6 million, and another that was based off a property that's estimated to be worth $92 billion. So what exactly did Palworld do that was so special? And how did it manage to make a game that currently sits at number 2 on the list of games on Steam with the highest concurrent player counts of all time? Well, that responsibility lands almost squarely at the foot of the developer of the Pokemon game series, Game Freak. Put it this way, it's not that Game Freak couldn't make a game like Palworld, it's that they wouldn't. This is a story of how corporate greed let a franchise become out of date, how a developer sat back and coasted on the knowledge of assured success, and how that attitude of unambition led to a tiny studio walking in and making the sort of Pokemon game that fans have been waiting for years. This is the story of the biggest intellectual property on the planet, and how a developer, with a fraction of their budget and influence, laid their weaknesses bare and showed just how much Game Freak has mismanaged its own golden goose. This is how Palworld beat Pokemon in its own game. Make sure to subscribe. Have you ever seen The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey? Well, if you haven't, here's a refresher. You'll see why it's relevant pretty quickly. So, King Thor and his dwarves have made a home in the Lonely Mountain and built a great city there, Erebor. This city was vast and cultured, and contained people from every walk of life in Middle-earth. Beneath it all, and fueling the heart of the city, was Thror's crown jewel, the mines of Erebor. Found deep within inside the earth, dwarves strive to mine all that could be extracted from the Lonely Mountain's natural wealth of riches. Gold in vast quantities, chests full of rubies, enough emeralds to replace the blades of grass in the pastures, and so many sapphires, the dwarves could have filled the rivers with them. As they mined more and more, Erebor became more and more wealthy, and Thror became more and more fixated on the wealth itself, and less on the city whose people generated it. Fast forward a little, and Thror finds the most beautiful gem of all, the Arkenstone, among the riches of the mountain. He develops what's known as dragon sickness, which generates a dangerous obsession with treasure. Of course, the one thing that Thror could never have foreseen was that the obsession driven by the Arkenstone would later lead to his own downfall. You see, as Thror collected and arranged his enormous piles of gold, rubies, emeralds and sapphires, he didn't foresee who would come for them. That would come in the next chapter of his reign, and that chapter was far, far darker than he can ever have imagined. The dragon Smaug came in a hail of fire, as Thror's lack of foresight had not only affected his own ability to prioritise the very thing he'd come to the Lonely Mountain for, but also his ability to set up adequate defences. Smaug blazed through Erebor, destroying all that Thror had built, drove out the dwarves, and took the gold for himself. So, why am I telling you about The Hobbit, when this is a story about Pokemon? Well, Game Freak are effectively the dwarves of the story. They've built their own city, being Pokemon, and they've acquired a vast amount of money and supporters through doing it. Fast forward 25 years, and Game Freak have begun to focus on all the wrong things. The Pokemon franchise continues growing in wealth, but it hasn't grown in design, ambition, or creativity. In other words, their defences are down. The one thing that made Pokemon unique was its capacity to create a roster of creatures in an expertly designed setting and coupled with an interesting and sophisticated game mechanics unlike any other. That was 25 years ago. Returns today, and Pokemon is essentially releasing small, iterated updates to a tried and trusted formula, while other developers are making leaping strides with every single new game. Pokemon is losing what made it special, and Smaug is on the horizon. Before I get to the coming of Palworld, however, here is the story of Pokemon, and how it went from the highest of highs with Pokemon Red and Blue to the lowest of lows in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Cast your eyes back to September 28th, 1998. That's the day that Pokemon Red and Blue first released on the Game Boy system. They were revolutionary titles, offering a unique creature collecting and battling experience, and selling an enormous total of over 38 million units. The development time of Pokemon Red and Blue from conception to release was 6 years. The next important date is November 21st, 2002, when Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire Generation 3 released on the Game Boy Advance. These games were almost entirely focused on legendary Pokemon, changing up the Pokemon formula, as well as introducing a new level of graphical fidelity due to the nature of the next generation Game Boy Advance. You know how much time there was between mainline Pokemon games at that point? 2 years. Keep that in mind. Fast forward to September 28th again, this time in 2006, and the 4th generation of Pokemon released, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Their release on the Nintendo DS meant that Wi-Fi play was introduced for the first time, and many features that were tailored for the DS system. The main gameplay remained very similar, with little adjustments and improvements, but nothing that lit the world on fire. Again, 2 years between games and the last mainline Pokemon release. Now we're all the way forward in 2013, with the first new entries for the 3DS system, Pokemon X and Y, and the big jump to proper 3D environments. Pokemon X and Y again added small improvements to the base gameplay, but note that Generation 6 only added 72 new Pokemon, meaning that Pokédex variety heavily depended on past releases. The most important thing to note, however, was that the gap between these games and the last mainline Pokemon release was only a single year. Now we're going to cover 4 years at once, because this is where it gets ridiculous. From 2016 to 2019, not only did the Nintendo Switch release, meaning that Game Freak was stepping into the world of home console releases, but there was a Pokemon game released every single year, and that's including 2 games for the Switch. So not only had 2 entirely new generations released at this time, but a sequel and a remake released as well. By the way, if you think that Game Freak slowed down on Pokemon game releases at this point, then let me burst your bubble. In 2020, both parts of the DLC of Pokemon Sword and Shield released, adding huge new open world areas, a new story each, and new activities. In 2021, my most hated remakes of all time released, and no, I'm not going to say them by name, they make me far too depressed. In 2022, both Pokemon Legends Arceus, my favourite Pokemon game of the last 10 years, and the 9th generation of Pokemon, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet released. Both huge open world or semi-open world games with unique gameplay mechanics and vastly different approaches to the classic Pokemon formula. In 2023, both parts of the Scarlet and Violet DLC released, capping off 8 whole years of Game Freak releasing either an entirely new mainline game or a spin-off every single year. If the problem with Pokemon hasn't truly hit you yet, don't worry, because I'm about to tell you exactly what it is. But not until we go over the arrival of the Smaug of the story, Palworld. On the 19th of January 2024, Palworld arrived in early access, and put it this way, it's not like being a day when Game Pass release affected its sales a whole lot. 8 hours after Twitter released, its Twitter account reported that it sold 1 million units. After a day, it sold 2 million units. 48 hours later, Palworld had sold 5 million copies, and after 6 days, its Twitter account confirmed that over 8 million copies had been sold on Steam. And as I write the script, it's actually just been announced that Palworld has just sold 12 million copies on Steam. Palworld smashed into the Steam top 10 list of games with the highest ever concurrent player counts, setting at number 2 with 2.6 million concurrent players just behind PUBG. It's still huge now, by the way, as 850,000 players are currently online, and that's only on Steam. That's not even taking into account that Palworld launched on Game Pass, but it's just been reported that it accumulated 7 million additional players. I cannot even tell you how insane that is, especially since Palworld comes from a small indie developer with little to no experience in game making. Like, it was insane. My jaw was on my desk seeing those absolutely mental player counts. So why did Palworld sell so well? Well, partly due to its ridiculous premise. Pokemon with guns sounds dumb as hell, and that would definitely have played a factor into its huge sales numbers. There's also the controversies that surrounded Palworld, such as the discourse around it supposedly being AI altered versions of designs stolen from Game Freak, and the fact that you make your pals work for you. But in my view, the main reason why Palworld became so popular is because it took a tried and tested formula that Game Freak had perfected, mixed it up with another formula that had been advanced by Ark Survival Evolved, and then combined it with some Zelda Breath of the Wild seasoning to create this amazing melting pot of a game, built on some of the strongest gameplay loops known to gamers today. Palworld was essentially something that Pokemon fans had been direly missing for a long time. Innovative and different. There's only one Pokemon game that I can think of that did anything remotely different or innovative to the classic formula, and that's Pokemon Legends Arceus. Do you know what Scarlet and Violet did with when they came along? They took away almost everything that made Legends Arceus special and centered themselves on possibly the most basic and bland open world we've seen yet. That's why Palworld sold so well. It dared to be different. So why hasn't Pokemon done that? It all comes back to what I was talking about earlier. Pokemon Red and Blue took 6 years to design and develop, and that led to one of the most iconic franchises of all time. Over the next 25 years, development time never increased, but the size and complexity of the games very much did due to the nature of the consoles they released on. Over time, the team at Game Freak has become so stretched and starved of the one thing that they need, time. They've effectively become unable to innovate. Even Ubisoft, the makers of Assassin's Creed, needed to stop the yearly release cycle of those games as they were becoming too samey. That all led to Pokemon Legends Arceus and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet releasing in the same year, which was a ludicrous decision, because both games were the biggest worlds Game Freak had ever shipped. That led to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet releasing buggy and horrendously unfinished, with glitches and graphical bugs so numerous that Game Freak were forced to directly address the situation. Not that they actually did anything about it, by the way. Scarlet and Violet is still insufferably glitchy and suffer from some of the worst performance I've ever experienced in a game by such a big company. And no, 10 FPS is not acceptable, even with things occurring on screen, even on the Nintendo Switch. You want to see a game that the Switch can run? The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which does have occasional performance issues, but also happens to be one of the most gorgeous games available on the Switch. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet not only run far worse than this, but they're ugly, basic looking games with some of those boring open worlds that I've ever experienced. There are so many issues with these games that I find them completely unplayable. Like, come on, if you're going to make an objective based open world game, then the least you could have done would be make a competent map. It's utterly useless. And that's not even taking into account the numerous pacing and scaling issues that Scarlet and Violet are repeatedly hamstrung by. But before this turns into a rant about how disappointed I was at the latest Pokemon games, my point is this. Game Freak have become so concerned with annual releases and making money that they've lost sight of what made the Pokemon series so special. The lack of advancement and innovation in the Pokemon series has meant that other companies have not only caught up to Pokemon mechanically, but in some cases, they're surpassing it. Put it this way, if during a Pokemon Presents we're all hoping that Game Freak won't announce a new Pokemon game, something is clearly wrong. Pokemon just doesn't operate on the scale it used to operate on. It's now a game that releases on home consoles, not outdated, graphically underpowered handhelds. Wait, how many description of the Switch getting here? What I mean is that the Game Boy and DS days are over. Pokemon needs more time to cook if it can ever be expected to live up to the standards of modern game design. We can't be having half-baked glitchy messes like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet releasing every year, it gives Pokemon a bad look and does nothing for the series going forward. So is it too late for Pokemon, and have games like Palworld taken over? The second part of the question can be answered easily. The first part entirely depends on what Nintendo does next. So, is it too late for Pokemon? I'm referring to Pokemon's ability to evolve, by the way, because, of course, it's too big to fail at this point. So can it evolve? Yeah, I think so. Pokemon as a series has such a huge amount of versatility and places it could go in the future. There are a number of ways that Game Freak can build on the foundation they created back in the 90s. From a more advanced combat system, to a dynamic and constantly changing open world, to a more complex and changeable story with options. Imagine Pokemon being a true RPG, with players able to go down their own paths and be whatever they wanted to be. Imagine if being the champion wasn't always the final goal, and it was up to players if they wanted to be a gym leader, work their way up the rank of the evil team of the region, or even do the opposite and join the police to hunt down the evil team. There are so many ways that Pokemon could be interesting, and that was just me spitballing, so it's repeatedly infuriating to see it attempt none of them, and settle for the bare minimum that's possible in a Pokemon game. The only way forward that I can see making a difference is if Game Freak take a significant amount of time off to rethink their strategy, plan a new direction for the franchise. Do I see this happening? Absolutely not. And that's where we come to the second part of the question. Have games like Palworld taken over? Not permanently, that's for sure, as we all know that the next generation of Pokemon will sell well and be on top for a short while. But if games like Palworld persist, and Palworld doesn't get a cease and desist, I can see them remaining popular as the next low effort generation of Pokemon sinks with time as more and more players bounce off of it. It's doubly frustrating to see that Palworld is succeeding or lacking one of the things that makes Pokemon unique: your relationship with the creatures you befriend. My pals in Palworld are more like co-workers than actual friends, but in Pokemon, they're partners. That's what makes Pokemon truly special. It's equally what makes it so aggravating. To answer the question, yes, for now, games like Palworld have taken over the house that Pokemon used to inhabit. And that's because Game Freak, with their absolute refusal to change or allow their developers more time to polish or finish their work, may as well have handed them the keys. Pokemon has gone from ruling the roost from the rooftops to having one foot in the back door. It's not too late quite yet, but more now than ever, Game Freak cannot allow themselves to become complacent. And that is how Palworld beat Pokemon at its own game. Let me know if you agreed with my thoughts on the subject down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and click that like button if you enjoyed. I'll see you all very soon for my next review. Catch you later. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm running a giveaway this week. Here's what's up for grabs. I'm giving away 3 keys for a brand new game releasing on the 12th of February this year. It's called Lightphobe, and it's an asymmetrical FPS game coming to Steam. It's actually the debut title from a developer named Mutant Realm Entertainment, and I'm currently in process of reviewing it, with a review releasing sometime next week. I'll give you a brief description provided by the developers. Lightphobe is an asymmetrical cooperative multiplayer game where players can choose between defending the Earth as a squad of well-armed soldiers or terrorising their enemies as the ethereal skeletal creatures known as Lightphobes. It's an intriguing game that uses light as a gameplay mechanic, with the Lightphobes being immune to damage unless exposed as a light source. I won't spoil my review, but I'm currently having a great time with it. Here's how you could win. Subscribe to my channel, like the video and comment down below that you subscribed. Now, with all that being said guys, thank you for watching and for subscribing, and I'll see you very soon.